a man who is an individual, but sees in himself the power of the masses. A man who is a sole individual. Biggie again. Biggie has, it's crazy, I'm going to start bringing hip-hop into this just to show you hip-hop isn't stupid, but Biggie has a line that says, he's referring to other people and he says, niggas. He goes, niggas bleed just like me. Picture me being scared of a nigga who breathes the same air as me, right? Now, how in the world does Biggie tie into Gasset? How does that tie into the masked man? Well, Biggie again, he said it just in a sense that everybody can understand. Niggas bleed just like me. You bleed just like I bleed. You're no different than me. You're a man just like me. Well, the masked man transcends that. He doesn't believe that. The masked man looks in himself and recognizes that his power is the power of the masses. So what he wants to do, the masked man wants to do, is he wants to tap into the power of the masses. Remember, we said 95 in one of the first lectures. 95% of the population occupies the masses. 4% of the population occupies the minority. 1% of the population occupies the aristocracy. The masked man channels his power from the masses. He can either do that channeling for good, or he can use that channeling for bad. But the masked man recognizes the power of the masses, and he harnesses that in a philosophical sense, in a very sort of trippy sense. He literally harnesses that power in himself. He embodies the power of the masses. He literally embodies the power of the masses. Now, if the masses are screaming for blood, if you've convinced the masses to go against and attack a portion of the population, and the masses want blood, the masked man then wants blood, right? The masked man then uses all of his power to give the masses what they want. Blood, 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 blood. So that abnormal government that we were talking about becomes a machine, right? I don't want to get into it too much because I'm actually doing current research on it and I don't want to let too much out. But that machine then becomes a tool for the masked man, right? The government only becomes a machine to satisfy the masses. And the masked man only cares about satisfying the masses. Why? Well, if you were to think of it, it's like this. The masked man rises to a pinnacle which is above government. And below government is the aristocracy. And below the aristocracy is the masses. And below the masses is the minority. Well, the masked man is, according to the Gasset, the apex of all of this. So the highest structure, the highest ideological position that there is to occupy is the masked man, is this paradox. The individual who bleeds just like me, who's a man just like me, who has a family or a wife or a kid, who makes decisions, who has feelings just like me, who was birthed from a mother and a father just like me, but he's not anything like me because he is a representative of a very select few of people within the world that can change the very fabric of reality, literally, right? And that was a quote that I read from the physicist, right? That if 12 or 13 of these physicists were to die, technological advances in understanding of science would cease, would halt, and it'd take generations to recoup that loss. The masked man gets his power from the masses, and he uses his power to satisfy the masses. So that what we recognize is that it is a transference in a sort of a Foucauldian sense. It is a transference, and obviously this is way before Foucault, but it's a transference in a Foucauldian sense of power from the masses to the masked man, from the masked man to the masses, right? The aristocracy and the minority really, in all seriousness, have really no point in this. Aristocracy is only concerned with their wealth, don't really have any interest in it at all. Minority are so oppressed that they're just trying to function day to day, find enough food to eat, just live. The masses is where the power is. The masked man rises to an apex, right? And it's not to say like every president, right? It's like a figure like Adolf Hitler, right, would be a representative of a masked man in a negative sense. A figure Gasset may debate whether or not Napoleon and so on might have been a representative figure of a masked man, but I think those are clear representatives of the masked man. Whether or not you can have a conception of the masked man who's also good, who's also altruistic, we'll have to read and wait for the next chapters. But for now, Adolf Hitler is the representation, the clearest, best representation of the masked man. The masses wanted blood. They wanted power. They wanted to lay all the faults of the economic decline of Germany within Europe on the Jew, and to say it's all the Jews' fault. And the masked man arose out of that sentiment. And what do you think he's going to do arising out of that sentiment? He's going to give them exactly what they want: blood. Now, here's what's important. And I don't want to get too technical because this is going to be far too technical, but I do have scholars who watch my videos, and I'm in communication with scholars all over the world. So this little bit is for scholars, or really geeky people who want to get this. And it's not a critique of Daniel Goldhagen, right? But Daniel Goldhagen introduces this concept of eliminationist anti-Semitism in one of his pieces, in one of his works that grew out of his dissertation. And the idea of eliminationist anti-Semitism is the suggestion that all of Germans wanted this, the masses, all of the German masses wanted blood. Blood, 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 blood. Adolf Hitler comes out of this and he gives them what they want: blood. He creates this idea, eliminationist anti-Semitism, as a general descriptive character of all Germans during the time, or most Germans during the time. I'll be charitable to Goldhagen, right? Most Germans during the time. The problem with that characterization, however, is that it's not fair to say that all or most Germans were like that, because obviously there was a huge separatist movement, right? There were, as in all times, like an underground railroad type of movement where Gestapos were being thwarted by Germans who had sympathies for Jews and hid Jews in their homes and sacrificed their lives to protect others, right? So the argument is that it's unfair, in sort of Daniel Goldhagen's discussion of eliminationist anti-Semitism, to say that all of the masses have a sentiment, elect the Fuhrer, and the Fuhrer then satisfies the masses, because not all of the masses are like that. If a large enough portion of the masses, now I think you can say that, right? Not even a majority. If a large enough portion of the masses, 40% of the masses is a huge number. It's not the majority, but it's a massive number. If a large enough portion of the masses can consolidate their power and then elect this masked man from that consolidated power, then there is the possibility to convert the following 60%. Right? So I don't think it has to be as much, under Gasset's terms, it has to be as much as the majority or all. I would suggest that you don't go as far as what people have accused Goldhagen of doing, and saying that, generalizing across masses. That would be problematic. I think what you can do is you can say, of the masses, if a significant enough portion of the population elects the masked man as its representative, then whatever the sentiments of the masses are will be the objectives of the masked man. Okay. Okay. So here's the point. He says, okay. He says, we find ourselves then face to face with the fact that by submitting the seed of our humanity to the treatment of two principles, and what are these two principles, right? Because we're trying to understand how is it that we have, within the course of 1 century, arrived at such a population explosion. Threefold, 300 million people have occupied Europe in 1 century. And the consequence, which Gasset himself didn't even recognize, would be that Adolf Hitler would rise to power to dominate Europe within 10, 15 years of the writing and publication of this. He saw that trajectory was coming, but within this piece, he wasn't obviously talking about Adolf Hitler in this section. How is it that this comes to be? He says there are two principles. The first principle is liberal democracy. The second is technological knowledge.